The Board of Adjustment meeting, everybody's aware of that? You'll have to stand for the pledge again. Thank you. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What a privilege, 2 pledges in one night. Okay, this is the meeting of the Morrison County Board of Adjustment. The board is made up of citizens from the 5 commissioners' districts of the county. Oddly familiar to the planning commission, aren't we? The purpose of the board is to review applications of property owners for relief from the strictest interpretation of the ordinances. Our guidelines are established in state statutes, chapter 394.27, subsection 7. The decision made by this board is the result of whether or not a practical difficulty has been determined. If the board determines there is a practical difficulty, we then review the guidelines in the form of 6 criteria questions that are answered at the end of the applicant's request. A final decision is then made. Each request is evaluated on its own unique practical difficulty. Variances are granted to the land, not to the landowner. This board may, in addition, impose conditions in the granting of variances to ensure compliance. After your hearing is complete, you may leave if you wish. Okay, the first item on the agenda tonight is Kenneth and Jacqueline Retka. If you could come forward and get that microphone nice and close into you. 20254 195th Avenue, Little Falls. Application for a variance to add on to a shed within 2 township road setbacks located in Belle Prairie Township. Okay, the applicants will please state your name for the record.
My name's Ken Redka.
I'm Jackie Recca.
Okay, and prior to the staff report, I sometimes forget to do this, but I'm remembering right now, is viewing on the 22nd, Amy, Clint, and Marv were there? Yep. Okay. I was there on the 24th, did a drive-by. Brent?
I was there on the 20th.
After us.
Okay.
I was there yesterday.
Okay. All right, so we all drove by at the very least. You saw any seedy-looking characters? It might have been Dave. It wasn't me. All right, staff report.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is a variance request to expand an existing shed within setback to the road right-of-way. This is located in Section 10 of Belle Prairie Township. The ordinance reference for this request is 604.9, and that requires a 40-foot structure setback from road right-of-way. Here's a plat map of Belle Prairie Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here's the variance request received from the applicant. And then this is a site drawing also provided by the applicant. Here's an aerial photograph of the parcel. And then here's some oblique imagery of the parcel. Then here's site photographs taken at the viewing on the 22nd of April. This is a 40-acre property, again, in Section 10 of Belle Prairie Township. The parcel is zoned agriculture and is a conforming parcel, which means it's at least 5 acres and 250 feet wide. The parcel is situated on the corner of 2 township roads, 195th Avenue and 203rd Street. According to the assessor's records, the home was built in 1981, and the 60 by 40 shed was built in 1982. Both structures met all setbacks. The applicant is requesting to place 2 additions onto the existing shed, a 40 by 94 on the north and a 30 by 40 on the west. Both additions would encroach into the setback from the township road rights-of-ways. And then here's another drawing, Mr. Chair, with the road right-of-ways turned on, the setback from the right-of-way indicated, and then the proposed building additions. There is a 24-foot drop in elevation over approximately 228 feet to the south of the existing shed. And then here are the elevation contours to show that. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is in agriculture, goal A1, goal A2. 18 notices were sent. No comment was received prior to the public hearing. And then here are your finding fact and decision questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Applicants have anything to add to the staff report?
No, I just want to add on to my existing building that's already there to be able to put all my things inside, my tractors, my excavator, my skid steer, my attachments, camper, fish house, boats.
So many toys. Do you have anything?
No, what he said.
I guess my question, before I open it up to the other board members, is, did you build the house? And
Nope.
originally, when did you purchase the property?
90,
Approximately.
2003,
or
Okay.
2000.
Thank you.
around there. And then we added on to the house in about 2008
9.
or 9, 2009. Then we did our addition onto the house.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Did we do the staff report yet? We did. Where was I? Any questions? Marv, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, okay, so I think a few of us have this question in our mind, is here you have a 40-acre parcel, and here you want to encroach on the road right away over there. You have other places, possibly build smaller sheds. Why would you want to encroach and go through this variance rather than placing one in a different area?
So part of the reason I have to redo the shed that I'm currently in, tin-wise and everything. So my first goal is to add on to that one and make everything up in the high ground of my property, because as you noticed with the elevations, everything goes downhill from there. And I have to keep so much agricultural land to keep my ag status, so I don't want to use any of my fields to do that. And even the fields are somewhat in a wetter area, so I want to keep everything up in the higher ground. And plus, this gives me full access in the dry, even in the wet seasons, this gives me full access to the things that are in that shed on a dry area. If you go down, the farther you go down, the wetter it is. So I'm trying to keep everything up in that dry area, which is the corner. That's the highest part of my property, is up there in the corner where I want to add on, so.
Okay, the next question I have for you, if you don't get this variance, do you have a plan, maybe possible smaller shed, smaller addition to meet the road right away? Did you give that a thought, or do you have a plan B?
I probably won't build on to that one then. Because it only leaves me so much space to build on. It just wouldn't be feasible for me to do that. I wouldn't gain enough space. I would have to look at something different.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any input at this time?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I think the township had some input on this. That is, those are their roads on both sides there. So I think he's,
Public comment.
We can wait for public comment, or we could do it right now.
He's busy visiting.
Pardon me?
He's busy visiting.
Yeah, yes. Would that be the fellow in the blue out back there? Yeah, rather than public, we'll treat you as an official, an expert.
My name is Greg Klom. I'm with Belle Prairie Township Supervisor. The town board has viewed it, and because of the trees the way they are, we don't feel that the shed expansion is going to bother the view of the intersection. There is a stop sign on both sides of it, so they do have to stop. But if the shed is expanded, it's not going to hinder the view of the intersection. So if there's
Okay.
any more questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if there was ever any road work that have to be done or anything, in the future, that wouldn't affect anything
I
is
don't
what you're
think s-
saying?
I don't think so. The road, I measured it, is 26 feet wide on both sides, and I don't see why the township, we'd ever expand it. It has a good ditch already, so there shouldn't be any road work at that intersection. I mean, it's fairly wide, so there's no reason to widen it out. There's a decent ditch on both roads, so we don't see any future remodeling of the road.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Cologne?
I just have one more, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, so then when we put up, on lake shores and stuff, we're talking about impervious surface and water runoff, so now we put a bigger shed, it's all gonna concentrate there. Your ditches have adequate, that ain't gonna affect the ditches any or any of that stuff.
It shouldn't, it's good slope both ways. We do have a little bit of trouble with the road right there, but it's basically because sometimes the grader leaves a little ridge on the shoulder, and water gets running down the road on us. So it's not the problem of the ditch, it's more of the crown of the road. So it's not the ditch that causes the problem, it's more the way the guy drags it once in a while.
So my question is, so it's just runoff from the road that is the issue in your problem?
Yes, the only thing we have any trouble with right there is because of it drops off so much to the east one time. There was a washout east of his driveway that had to be filled in, but it had nothing to do with, I think it just the water got running and it started cutting in it. It didn't run into the ditch, it ran down the road. But that's only once, and I think I've been on the board 20 years and I haven't seen any major issues on that road.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
No, that clears it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the applicant or any other potential experts out there? Okay, are you ready for public input? All right, we'll open the meeting up for public input at this time. Is there anybody that would like to make a statement for or against this application? Is there any public input at this time? Any public input? I've asked 3 times. There's no other input, so we'll close the meeting to the public input portion of the meeting tonight and get on with the questions or other comments from the board.
Mr. Chair, I just have one question, quicker clarification. Okay, so if we look at our map when we were out there, so Ken, first, thank you for not trying to build a shed out in the ag land. We're just working on some of them things the last couple months to prevent that from happening as far as homes, so I don't see a need to put a shed in a field. But to the east of your driveway, there's a little spot, but is that big enough? But then it'd be a lot of slope if you would build a shed over there.
It would be a long shed and a lot of filling in to go.
And then with your house there, you'd probably be you wouldn't meet the
Well,
setback to the north.
But I also have the High Line, I have the major power line
Oh, yeah.
running through. That's the other issue too. Because if you look at so many pieces of the property, the High Line, so if you go south, the High Lines run through there also, so that becomes a problem, so you have to be so many feet away from the High Lines,
Okay,
so.
okay,
I'd
that's,
like to follow up that question with looking at the picture here. If you go back to that one, Amy, the one we were just on.
I was actually gonna put this one up, thinking that was maybe.
Yeah, these are all beautiful pictures. I'm proud of you.
I took it myself.
I know what you do with your weekends now.
Is that the one you want?
No, the one with the street numbers on it, the one we were just looking at. There you go. Directly under 203rd, that's a steep slope. That's why it's not ag land. That's why it's not in ag. It's too steep for that. So it isn't prime ag land. It's not ideal building, but people have built and on steeper slopes than that, it could be done. I don't know that there's an argument that there isn't another spot on here that doesn't take out prime ag land that wouldn't be a potential building spot. Difficult, but potential. as the site plan, or as the staff report states, there's 32 acres of building envelope. Doesn't present much of a practical difficulty, which, as I read through the opening statement, that is our thing that we have to determine. Above and beyond all other points, is there a practical difficulty? So, but with that,
Mr. Chair,
but from you or from anybody else, go
can I
ahead.
clarify where you're looking, just to make sure? Are you looking on the green or in the,
Right below 203 RDST.
okay, that's a swamp.
It's a swamp and there's a creek that, or a little
Oh,
stream
that's
that comes
wetland,
through
that's
there.
not
wetland.
It's all
slopeland?
low- That's all lowland.
It's a wetland that goes into our,
Pretty much anything that looks brown all there, that's
Yeah.
all wet.
Okay. And over to the west boundary, I think that's west. Yeah, west boundary, are those two dark spots ponds?
they're low and, yeah.
Ponds.
Ponds.
And that's all low too? Okay, so you're right, Mr. Catherine.
I just want to clarify where you're looking,
Yes,
that's why.
yes.
'cause-
I did the drive-by, I must have gone by that spot really quick. Okay, good point.
Yeah, because that's all natural drainage that comes all the way from the north, goes out the west. And so when we get heavy rains, it's a river.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You can see it clear here.
Yes, okay.
You were standing here, and you can see it's a very steep point down.
And that's all heavy clay,
Yeah,
so it gets pretty greasy.
so the green is probably the only potential building site you've got. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments before we go on to the questions? We're ready for the questions? Let's do that.
One, can I just, Mr. Chair, real quick one.
Yeah.
I can't find on the map here, where's your, maybe it says here, where's your well located?
It's on the map.
Yeah, here, maybe it
It's
is.
directly south of the house,
Okay.
down towards,
Oh, I see it now.
Pond.
I see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, I just wanted to clarify, and the septic's here, okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm ready.
All right, we're ready for the questions then. For this first question, we're going to start with you, Dave Brucher. So you know I'm not talking to myself.
Okay, go. Is the request, is that number one?
Number one, is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan?
I would say yes, it is, and especially since we have approval from from Belle Prairie Township, that rural area out there, and then preserving, there's really no other place to put that shed, other than sticking it out in the field someplace. So I'd say yes.
Okay. We're on to Marv, Brent, myself, and Clint. Chime in. Go ahead, Marv.
Well, with the township support, and as Greg Colomb, he's been on the board over 20 years. He understands the road. He understood everything of that situation. I had a concern about the safety and with the stop signs and the four-way crossing, and he addressed it. So with that, yes, it is in harmony.
Okay, anybody else have anything to add?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that, we're looking at two different setbacks here for quite an expansion into the right-of-way. Granted, it's behind the tree lines, but we are looking at expanding it almost double the size that it is already, going in and moving into the right-of-way on a corner of the two roads. Well, we heard from the township that it's behind the tree line, so it's not a site issue. It may be an issue down the road if they do want to change the apex or radius of that road or something at some point. And I just want this board to understand that could be a future concern.
Okay, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead,
I would
Clint.
just add to it that, thanks Brent for his concerns. When I look at it, they have a 40-foot right-of-way, and then they're supposed, or no, I can't remember what Mr. Klum said their right-of-way was, but we have a 40-foot setback. So that puts us at 14 feet on the north side, the county, the road 203. That would put us 14 feet away from the right-of-way. So it'd be whatever the right-of-way is plus 14 feet. And then on the avenue, 195th Avenue, it'd be 21 feet away from the right-of-way, plus you have the right-of-way. So just so everybody understands that, that's all I have.
And my question would be to clarify the size of that building. I see 80 by 90, 81.25 by 94.27. Is that with the overhangs or?
Mine was 40 by 94 on the north side and 30 by 40. That's what I had on my paperwork, so it would not be over that. And I don't have an amount to build this thing yet, so the contractor wanted me to get approval first. This is what I'm proposing to do. I may downsize it from there.
No.
But this is the maximum proposed size of the shed.
Which is 80 by 90? Or
Which
the
is
setbacks?
40
Whatever
which
the
is
setback.
40 foot by 94 on the north side, and then adding on 30 by 40 onto my existing building to the west side.
And the structure of that size, if you were to go with that size, what would be the height of that
It
structure?
wouldn't be over 35, which is according to the regulations.
Okay. So, yeah, that's another consideration. General purpose and intent of the ordinance, one of the purposes is to maintain the right-of-way, of course, and the setbacks from the right-of-way, and the character of the zone. That's going to be an ominous-looking structure. It's going to be, it's what you see when you go by that corner, even with the tree screening there. If trees die, go away, it's, all you'll see is the building. Perhaps a condition would be to maintain those trees, make sure that they're always there, but they further obscure the site as you're going down the road. Again, when I drove by, I thought that was the first thing I was going to look at was, can I see down the road when I get to the stop sign? Well, the trees are there. So it's the trees that obstruct your view, but if the trees aren't there, then it'll be the shed that obstructs your view. I'm not sure if I'm arguing in circles here or not, but 35 foot tall and 80 by 90 is a large imposing structure, whether it's an ag or wherever, and if it's within the setback, it's going to stand out more. I'm not certain how I'll vote on this, but I would say that is not the intent and purpose of the ordinance to allow encroachment with this size of a structure. Okay, any more number one answers? If not, we'll go on to number two, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the ordinance. We'll start with Marv.
I wrote down here, is it more personal preference versus practical difficulty? And this is where, it's just like, as Steve pointed out on the earlier question, the size of it. And here, then the power lines are brought into picture. And something else, as looking at that property, if you're with that shed, it probably could be extended a little bit more to the south if you needed it that large. But then it would be cutting into that shed wall and moving it. But it's still, is it reasonable? I don't know, it's questionable. I think it's more personal preference versus practical difficulty in my eyes right now.
Okay, anybody else?
Sure.
Go ahead. Clint?
I mean, we restrict everything. Now we're in ag and we're gonna try and say that it's difference between personal and practical difficulty, where why are we worried about how big a building is? I look more at where it's gonna be, and then I look at more the practical things. Like, I noticed the trees also when I was out there, and I thought, what the hell's the difference if the trees are there that close to the road or a building? Granted, you can cut trees down to do road work, okay? But what's the difference if the trees are 35 feet tall and they impede that corner, or a building is another 14 feet and 21 feet away and so-called obstructs your view? Everything we do on our land is personal. I mean, you want a new house, that's personal, right? You know what I mean? So I look at it to try and see where the practical difficulty would be, is where else on this property we could build something. The only other place I see other than an ag field, which I appreciate, I'm not trying to do that, would be to the east side of their driveway with the power lines there, and it would take an awful lot of fill, and not against that, but then we gotta look about, we worry about runoff and all kinds of other things when we're looking at shoreline. Here we got a really low area to the east. Now you start putting in 10 feet of fill to make the ground level to get a shed on that side of the property. Now we gotta start worrying about erosion and everything else to go towards that wetland. So when I look at it, I think there is a practical difficulty here, and I believe that they're proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner. That's just my take on it.
Thank you, Clint. Anything else on number 2? David, go ahead.
You know, when it comes to property rights, a person has a right to use their property in a reasonable manner. And in this case here is that, what if the township is okay with it and they're far enough away from the road right-of-way? I say that we as a board don't have a reason to tell him he can't do it. I say it's a reasonable manner, because as a property owner, he has a right to use his property in a reasonable manner. And I don't see any overriding reason that we could decline this. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else on question 2? I guess I'd just like to remind board members that it's reasonable manner through the eyes of the ordinance, through the eyes of the intent of the ordinance, and through the eyes of the public that the ordinance affects, not just through the eyes of the landowner. So, just.
You know,
throw that out there.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
You know, that's the purpose of this board. If we didn't have this purpose, we wouldn't be here. He would just be turned down at the counter. And so I think it's within our purview to say what I'm saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'd agree, absolutely. But again, reasonable through the use of the ordinance, or the filter of the ordinance. Okay, anybody else on number 2? Number 3, will the requested variance, number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Brent?
I'll bring this down. I think, you know, you do have the buffer there of the tree line, so that does shelter somewhat of the building that's proposed there, but being that it might be 35 feet tall, that might be a little towering over the top of those trees, to say the least. The essential character is rural, it's agricultural in this area. I don't know that it's not going to maintain the essential character.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, the only observation I'd make to that is that they kind of are the essential character of the neighborhood. There's no close neighbors to add or take away from or to set the tone. They are it. And again, I just have to question a large, very large, imposing building that close to the road is going to change the character of that corner. Anybody else on number 3?
Oh, that's what I was doing, looking on.
Go ahead, Clint.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry. Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, that's why I was looking on aerial views to see what's in the area. You know, you got to go a mile or so farther away, and there is some pretty big structures then. And you're correct, that is the character, because there is nothing right around there. There are very few neighbors. You guys are pretty lucky. But, so that's just what I'd have to add. You'd have to go maybe a couple miles away, and there's some houses and some other structures like that that are fairly close to the road, not that close, but fairly close to the road, that are just as big as what the shed is. Go a mile and a half to the north, you guys probably know what I'm talking about. I mean, there's some houses that are pretty big close to the road that are gonna be as big as this shed, so that's all I'd add to.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on essential character? Okay, right into number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? I'm supposed to start out with that one. It's been pointed out to me that there's wetland there, there's ag fields, there's little else other than a green space with a steep slope just east of the house. So there are practical difficulties in that property. But does a personal need outweigh weigh evenly with a practical difficulty to create a practical difficulty? I haven't decided on that yet. So anybody else on number 4? Marv?
Mr. Chair, one other item on there we talked about is, it was brought out, Ken brought up the power line that is there too. So we have numerous items that could be considered practical difficulties in that respect.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay, so again, you know, we're in ag, and we just been working for a couple months on trying to preserve our ag land and change a few things. And so if we take away the farm fields and just say we're not going to put anything in that, and you look at the rest of the building envelope here, and then if we look at the steep slopes of this property and then the wetland that's on two sides of it, so it kind of puts it in a corner. I think that gives you a lot of practical difficulty for, you know, yes, they got 40 acres of buildable area, but to me, when I look at this property, the buildable area is basically the green in the northwest corner of this property where their house and their shed is already. And if you try to find a spot around there to build this shed, there is practical difficulty, because if you go to the south, it's so steep, you have to add so much fill, you're tearing up the ground. What's the difference between taking care of shoreline on a lake or a wetland? Same thing when you go to the east. I just think when you start opening that up and putting fill in and how that works, I just think that's the practical difficulty, that we don't want to disturb that wetland area either. Because it's more than just a wetland for their property. If you look at the aerial view and you know the area, that's a wetland that's going to filter a lot through that probably couple mile section. So that's how I'd probably come up with my practical difficulty.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add to number 4? On to number 5. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Clint?
You had to give me this one, huh? Possibly just the terrain, the way this this landscape of this property that they have, I think probably dictates more on how you can build something or develop this area than probably the people before them or themselves. Originally, when it was the house was built, I think that the landscape and the just the way the land is shaped and how the downhill slopes, I think had just as much creation for this variance as the landowner and the prior landowner.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on number 5? Okay, well, we kind of paint ourselves into a corner on this one. Realistically, you know, we do this with lakeshore property a lot of the times. What you've got is what you get. We've kind of argued that that's all that the property can support within ordinance. There's no other place to build. So by this request, you know, again, I asked, you know, the history, so I could lay the blame on somebody else or onto you for picking this site or picking the building location. So again, I'm thinking this is a no. It's the actions of the landowner, and the property can't support any more than what it's got, just by its unique practical difficulties. Right, anybody else? Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Dave Brucher, you start out?
Yes, it does, because the other possible building sites here are not really practical. We can't move down to the power line, we can't move down in the swamp. I'd say that, yes, it does involve more. If they want to build, that's the only place that's really buildable there, other than going out in the farm field.
Okay, anybody else?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
I believe there's more than just economics, because if there was another site to build on, I'm sure Ken can attest that you could probably build a whole new shed cheaper than trying to add on to this. So he's not trying to save money. It's going to cost them more to do this. There's more to this than just economics.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Brent.
Amy, can you pull up an overview of this? I want to make sure I'm clear in my head where this power line is, because it's difficult to see on, and maybe the applicants can point just exactly where that power line runs.
Right where them
So,
gardens are.
so it'd be to the right of the house, or?
It's to the right of the house, so it's right through here. Show that one right there where the gardens.
Maybe,
Right here.
It's like the post is between two.
Clearing on the north is where the power line goes through, right?
Yep.
so it's kind of in that wetland area, right at the edge of the wetland is where that power pole is?
And there's two 32-inch culverts right there where that power line is. So there's a significant amount of water that goes through there. It goes all the way around the house. There's 232s there, and then when you go to the other side of the house on 190, there's two 32-inch culverts there, so there's significant amount of water
So you can hear.
around their house.
Okay, did you catch that for the minutes? I didn't have, or do you need them to do that through a microphone, or? Did you, did we record that adequately, or does he need to go up to the microphone?
Yep, I record this
Okay,
here, so we're good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Marv, did you have something to add?
Also, I'd like to point out, as we talked about, they were talking about keeping their ag property as much as possible in their economic considerations. So that I think they're looking at more than just the economics of this.
Okay. All right, thank you. I agree with all of that input on number 6. Are we ready for the questions?
Yes.
Okay. Question number 1, is the request in harmony with the general purposes intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
Okay. Is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Start out with Marv.
No.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
And Dave?
Yes.
Okay. Number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
And Marv?
Yes.
Okay. Number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Myself, the answer is no. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
And Brent?
No.
Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowner? Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Question number 6. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Dave Brucher?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself is yes.
And Clint is yes.
Excuse me?
You didn't call on Clint.
Clint is yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. How did I do that? Okay. Question number 5 was answered to the negative. Are there any conditions that we could place on this? Any more discussion on that question that could change our answers? I know we haven't talked any conditions, but sometimes we can do that.
Mr. Chairman, if we wanted, he said that that was just the maximum size. If we had them downsize it a little bit, would that be an acceptable condition to the other board members?
That's good discussion. I was thinking the same thing.
Could I reduce
The
it,
narrower it gets, the lower the,
Yes.
the peak.
reduce it by 10 feet on the north side, so that would be 30 by 94?
So that would be in 70-foot wide building.
Correct.
And how high of a peak would that be about?
I would have to
How high
check.
sidewalls do you have there?
16,
16, and you'd maintain the 16-foot sidewalls?
yep. In order to get a camper in there, you have to have a 16-foot high sidewall.
Or truss rafters, or rafters that are designed differently?
Yeah, I guess I haven't looked at that option for that span.
I'm just take a guess and say it's 25 feet.
Okay. Is that what you were thinking, Dave?
Yes, I was thinking along that same line too, right? Is that looking at that's the yellow lines is what we're looking at on this map here, would be is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that that would make it a lot more palatable if we brought that north side back another 10 feet, to me anyway. If we're looking for some way that you can get this done.
And that was my thinking as I've been going through this process of maybe reducing it down. But I wanted to get approval for the max, but I would definitely go 10 foot less.
I don't know, that was just a suggestion. It's up to the other board members here too.
Okay, then that would be how much of a, what is the word I'm looking for, Amy? How much of a infringement on the setback?
Encroachment?
Encroachment,
So on,
thank you.
on this site drawing, there aren't dimensions or measurements, so I'm gonna go to
I can answer that.
this
you want.
one.
I gotta figure it out.
Okay, go right ahead.
Well, before, on that street, it was 14 feet. The building would be 14 feet away from the right-of-way. If he's gonna shrink it by 10, that would be 24 feet away from the road right-of-way.
Okay,
So-
and the setback is,
40 feet from
40
the road
feet.
right-of-way. And so what exactly are the new dimensions? I just want to make sure I have that.
So the
ahead.
addition would be 30 by 94 on the north side,
Okay?
and still the 30 by 40 west addition onto the building of the west
You
side
know,
of the building.
I guess I'd prefer to hear it in terms of the dimensions of the proposed building, because you could add on to the other side if we only,
Well, the total building then, let's just call it, it's 70 by 94, would be the total building that includes the existing
Yes.
structure.
Okay.
So,
okay?
Do you have that, Amy? 70 by 94, yep.
So it's encroaching by how many feet?
It would be 24 feet, well, it's encroaching, 16 feet.
Okay,
And then it would be encroaching 19 feet the other way.
19 feet the other way, okay. Any other offers on the other end of the building? Get it a little farther from the road? I got to do that, Dave.
All right.
let's just do 70 by 90. That's 4 feet off the west also. Would that be a round number, 70 by 90?
Your proposal, or original proposal was 80 by 90.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, 94.
oh, maybe. Yeah. All right,
Mr. Chair?
okay.
If
go
he
ahead.
would do that, it would be pretty much equal. One would be 1 foot different, but we'd be looking at equal setbacks from each side if it would be that dimension.
All right. All right, how does the board feel about that? As a condition, and then we'd re-vote if we had this condition fully fleshed out.
Mr. Chair, I've already voted yes, so it's going to be up to
Okay.
the negative votes.
Re-vote, and the condition would be what, Amy?
Condition would be the maximum size of the building, including expansions, would be 70 by 90.
And you'd have this, the encroachments on
That's
there.
correct, yes.
Okay. All right. With that in mind, let's look at question number 5. The rest of them were answered to the affirmative, unless we want to revisit all of them.
I think we just need to do one change.
Okay. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Start out with Clint again on that.
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Okay, with that in mind, all 6 questions have been answered to the affirmative with a smattering of no's in there, which you shouldn't take lightly. Are we done with our voting? Okay, are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
I'd make a motion that we'd approve this application with the new size of the building.
I second that motion.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor, will say aye. I will start out with a roll call here. Marv?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself is aye. Clint?
Aye.
And Dave?
Aye.
It's amazing how that happened. Okay. Okay, we've recommended this over to the, oh, no, this is a variance, yep. If you're approved, go see Amy about the details.
All right, thank you for your time.
So your next step is you can go ahead and apply for the permit
Okay,
whenever you're ready.
all right, thank you.
Okay?
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience and your information tonight.
Give them a pen.
Just when I was really in the flow of things here. Okay, next item on the agenda is Kenneth Brown. Will the applicant please come forward and take your place at the microphone?
Can you sign this for me?
Okay, this is at 35497 Sullivan Drive, Hillman. Application for a variance to add on to a non-conforming structure and extend a deck, which is an after-the-fact, yeah. Expand a non-conforming, okay, an after-the-fact variance to keep expansion of a non-conforming deck and a variance to expand a non-conforming structure located in Richardson Township. Reading from the wrong sheet here. Okay, applicant, state your name for the record, please.
It's Kenneth Braun, B-R-A-U-N.
Thank you. Amy, staff report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is an after-the-fact variance to keep the expansion of a non-conforming deck, and then also a request for a variance to expand a non-conforming structure. This is located in Section 7 of Richardson Township. The ordinance references for this is Section 301, 301.6, 706.1, and 706.3. Here's a plat map of Richardson Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here is the variance request received from the applicant. And then here's a site drawing also provided by the applicant. And an aerial photograph of the parcel, or the property, I should say, because there's several parcels. And then here's some oblique imagery of the property. And then here is, on the left is an aerial photo from 2017, which shows the original deck. And then on the right is the aerial photo from 2020, which shows the deck that you saw at your viewing. And then here are some site photographs taken at the site viewing on the 22nd of April. Again, the property is in Section 7 of Richardson Township. It's on Sullivan Lake, which is a general development lake. The property is made up of 3 parcels, and together they are a non-conforming single lot, which means it's less than 30,000 square feet and 120 feet wide. The property is 150 feet wide and 22,350 square feet. According to the assessor's records, the 1,156 square foot dwelling was built in 1981, and the garage was built in 1982. The county does not have record of the permitting for the dwelling, but does have record of the garage construction. According to aerial photo review, the home is approximately 48 feet, and the deck is approximately 40 feet, and the garage is 55 feet from the lake. The shoreline specialist did go out to confirm those setbacks, and I did clarify that with you. So the house is 53 feet, and the deck was 44, I believe. Research into past ordinances shows that between the years of 1972 and 1991, the required setback to general development lakes was 100 feet, but it allowed for buildings to be in line with existing structures, but no closer than 50 feet. In 1991, the setback was reduced to 75 feet, and the setback averaging was removed. There is an extremely narrow building envelope on the property. It's approximately 2,700 square feet. And the applicant purchased the property in 2004. And then here's a drawing of the approximate building envelope on the property. The applicant is requesting 2 variances. The first is an after-the-fact variance to keep the deck expansion already undertaken. This was caught during the development review team meeting. The original deck was 14 by 10. The existing deck is 30 by 10. And then the second request is a variance to construct an 8 by 26 addition onto the west side of the cabin, 48 feet from the lake. And then here's the impervious surface calculation provided by the applicant, and that is 22%, 25% impervious is allowed. At the development review team meeting, staff discussed the following with the applicant: the significance of the shore impact zone, why the need for addition on the west side rather than the north, and the explanation was layout of the cabin. Need to confirm the setbacks from the lake, which we did with the shoreline specialist. The practical difficulty versus personal need, impervious surface, and that the driveway should be counted in the calculation. Improvements that could be made, especially within the shore impact zone. The shed occasionally used as a bunkhouse, and that needed to discontinue. And the deck was expanded a few years ago with no permitting, and that must be addressed. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2. Shoreline development, goal D1. And then the water plan goals and objectives is the surface water goal, objective B. Land use and development goal, objectives B and D. 106 notices were sent. No correspondence was received prior to the public hearing. And then here are your finding of fact and decision questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, would you like to add anything to Amy's report at this time?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the confirmation of how far the cabin is back according to the measurements, I think it's 53.5 feet rather than inside the 50-foot setback. I think that's important to be noted, so I'm not, and the addition isn't going any closer to the lake than the existing cabin. It's a 208 square foot addition to the cabin, which isn't bad. It's gonna be, it's gonna blend in. As I said, if you read through my response to the application, you'll see that everything's gonna blend in like you wouldn't even know it was there before. So, other than that, I don't think I have anything else to add. Unless, well, the reason for the addition is for bathroom. My current bathroom is small. It's kind of situated between two bedrooms. I'm gonna take out the existing bathroom and actually build the addition with two bathrooms. So we're adding one bathroom and the ability to build that addition without taking the initial bathroom out of service while we do that is part of the reason why it's on that side. So it's, and ease to get to the plumbing and things that are on that end of the building. So that's, I guess, all I have to say right now.
Okay, thank you. Before we proceed, Amy, normally when we have an after the fact, we generally have a letter that goes with it that gives the applicant or the offender two options, either get compliant or go for an after the fact. What would be compliant? I mean, if you did have that letter out to us.
Yep, so what would be compliant is the deck, the original deck, and I'll pull that picture up.
By compliant, we mean grandfathered in, correct?
Correct.
Not necessarily permitted, but,
That's what the property owner would have a right to, as far as for a replacement deck, we would permit, and let me just zoom this in, because I know it's a little. He would have a right to replace this. Anything larger than that, we'd be doing expansion of a non-conforming
Okay.
structure. So what you see in that picture is what could be permitted to be replaced without a variance.
and every other structure or improvement on the property is also compliant at this point?
It's considered a legal nonconformity. So by today's standards, the cabin does not conform. The garage and the shed do not conform, but they're legally there, so they're legal to continue and even through replacement.
Okay.
Yes,
Yep. Grandfathered in.
correct.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, with that in mind, questions by the Board of Adjustment? Questions for the applicant, questions for staff, or there are experts out there?
Mr. Chair, first question, in front of your cabin there towards the lakeside, you have it listed as a well. Is that a well or a lift pump?
It's a well.
Okay, because it was running continuously and it looks like there's,
It's artesian well. So if you know what an artesian well is, when last summer it was not running because we were so dry, but when the water table starts filling up and the aquifers start filling up, it relieves itself
okay,
into that basin and stuff, so it relieves itself. That's, I guess, the only way I can
okay.
describe it.
Thank you, it's kind of neat. It looks like your property over there is the lowest of all the cabins there, and to, I believe it would be the west there, there's like a stream or whatever, and looks like that gets a lot of water that probably goes through there. In fact, I think there's an area where when it starts raining, it must come in quite hard, where some boards or some barriers were put in. I think Amy took a picture of that to prevent I'm assuming that is to prevent erosion there, or what is the reasoning for that?
Well, that piece of retaining wall was actually from a house I trucked, that I took out, left it up there, and I just pegged it in. It's not retaining anything, it's really just sitting on top of the thing. It was just so that people don't inadvertently just run into the drainage way or the stream. You know, again, last summer that thing was bone dry and I mowed it, you know, I maintained that little drainage way. It relieves some water that's in the ditch in front of my place, but there's a culvert that goes under the road to a piece of private property on the other side that, for whatever reason, drains through there, through my property. I mean, there's no formal drainage easement on my title, but I put up with it. It's fine, I guess, you know, I maintained my portions. Today I just raked all the leaves out of it, so.
Something that I'm thinking about a previous situation, and Dave was on the board for some time longer than me. We had a similar situation where the lowest piece of property, I believe that was on Fish Trap or Alec, and then the property owner took it upon himself to direct where the water went, and it created a lot of issues. And I'm just concerned if we grant you this variance, that is right near this, I mean, very close to this here. And if this isn't gonna create some problems down the road here, and the shoreline specialists, did they point out anything, what they recommended on this?
When the shoreline specialist was out to verify setback, it was something he had noted, was that there was that drainage way and the proximity of the addition to that. And then also, the second set of stakes, is that where the proposed retaining wall is?
No, actually, so the first set of stakes is where the wall is. So I'm about 10 feet probably from the edge of the addition wall to the closest piece of the drainage way. Those other stakes are out there. If I explain, I'm gonna have a door on that side, so that's just a stairway. So I just wanted to show a little 4-foot stairway that's gonna come off of that door and go down towards
Okay,
the
so,
lake.
so this set of stakes right here, what is that denoting?
That's the outside edge of the little stairway.
The outside edge, so
Yep.
your stairs will terminate here?
No, my stairs are gonna go that way, so I'll have a platform
I
at the
got it.
top, and they'll go out just,
Towards the lake?
yeah, there's
Okay.
2 or 3 steps, be no more than
Okay.
what's, you know, on my
Got it, okay.
deck expansion there.
Okay. So getting back, the shoreline specialist noted that it was close, and he had noted that when he looked at the web soil survey and what he observed, it was pretty heavy wet soil, and was concerned that in high water times, when that drainage ditch is really full, that may, so he had just pointed that out. He didn't make any recommendations. It was just something that he noted when he was out there verifying setbacks.
Okay, that's a concern of mine there. Thank you.
So I'd like to piggyback on that retaining wall. So the line of stakes, which is the edge of the proposed addition, is the retaining wall? And it's built on top of the retaining wall?
No,
Or
no.
is, yeah, clarify that retaining
No,
wall,
so
please.
I had anticipated, the ground slopes a little bit away from the current cabin. And when I dig out this addition, what I wanna do is level that off and put a 2 or 3 course retaining wall probably out at the perimeter of where the stairs is. The stair, just so that I can level out the grade in that, around that area. It's really a non-structural retaining wall. It's just something that'll help 2 or 3 courses of decorative retaining wall blocks, so I can level out the grade in that whole area. So I can blend in easier the drainage way and the grade adjacent to the addition.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I think I understand what you're proposing. I don't know if anybody else needs more than that. Okay, other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint, sorry.
Amy, in the staff report, there was something noted, in the DRT meeting that you had improvements in the shore impact zone. Is that something, was there something there or what?
I'll go back to that slide here. So which one? Improvements
Number
that could be
6, yeah.
made, especially with in the shore impact zone. Whenever we have anybody that has got anything in the shore impact zone or is very close, we always have the discussion with the property owner as far as what do you have going on in the shore impact zone? What, if any, improvements could they be thinking about to incorporate into their application? So that's what we had talked about, and that was the extent of that conversation. Yes.
And then, also on there, I don't know if it was, let's see here. There was something I read in there about, that little shed maybe did some bunkhouse
Number
at one
7?
time. Number 7, yes.
Yes.
Shed occasionally used for a bunkhouse. Can you add anything to that or?
Yeah, I addressed that. We talked about that at the initial meeting, and it's a shed, and it's a wooden tent. At time to time, when my kids had kids up there, maybe somebody slept in there, along with everything else, and I said to Amy, I'm gonna, in an email, I'll put an end to that, and it's just a shed. It's not intended to be an auxiliary sleeping structure on the property. It's just, we'll asked and answered, we'll take care of that.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my final question, if you might, so just reiterate again why, you're gonna go, you wanna go to the, I believe it's the west.
Yes.
Why you couldn't add on to the north? Can you allude to that a little bit?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, there'd be, excuse me, a little larger trees to take out to do that. Number two, the way that the cabin is set up is right now the waste and water come down the middle and feed that little bathroom. And to get the correct elevation for the waste piping and to get it to drain, the closer I stay to that existing bathroom, the better. Otherwise, we have to drop the sanitary main and do all that stuff, and that may sound like a non-practical difficulty, but it's a practical difficulty. I mean, everybody should have, practical, even economic things in their mind when they're looking at these things, is not to cause any additional burden, but it just seems like that. In addition to that is the fact that I can keep that bathroom in service while I could build this addition, get one bathroom in service before I take out the other one. So that's more or less the reason to go to the west. And it's a less obtrusive addition. It's 8 foot off the end by 26 wide, so it's gonna really match what's there rather than trying to conform something or shape something that's gonna come off the north end, which would be probably larger. And, to get that, if it all could work out with the plumbing and things, I guess anything can happen, but, it's just seems like just to make it 8 feet longer is the best route.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anybody else? Want some public input? We'll see if I can find any out there.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a quick, because we've got two pieces to this. We have the deck and we have the addition. And because one is after the fact and one isn't, you will need to vote on them separately. But are you wanting to discuss both now before you go to public comment and all of that? I just want to make sure that you're addressing both and discussing both, because you're going to need to vote on both of those separately. So,
I was thinking that in the past, a couple of times, I don't know if we've done it with after the fact, but we've done it with multiple variances, addressed them both at the same time, and just made sure we were giving reasons that were pertinent to both requests, because, I mean, for the applicant to understand how this goes, we do have to look at that as a variance request.
That's correct. The only thing that I'm saying is all of your discussion and questions so far have been geared toward the addition.
Sure.
There hasn't been any discussion about the deck. So I just want to make sure that you've got enough information and get everything you need from the applicant in order to even put something on the record when you answer the questions regarding the deck.
Mr. Chair?
So either way, we could address it either way, as long as we did that, correct, Amy?
That's correct.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chair? So plead your case on your deck. What happened there?
Well, as you read in my application, what happened there, I hired a contractor to build, to extend the deck sideways. I didn't, for a number of reasons, I didn't want to go any closer to lake than the original deck because, number one, I didn't want to do that, and number two, we use that flat area, fortunately it's flat, for yard games and things, so I didn't want to build this monstrous deck. So we went east and west rather than out further. I hired a guy to do it. He said he's got it all covered, built it, done, paid him, great. I didn't realize it, I apologize, I didn't realize I needed to approach the land use application or get a variance to an ordinance on this, and I had thoroughly thought that he had the ball, and he didn't. Apparently, he fumbled it, so I'm standing here, you know, I guess, saying, look, can we make amends and figure this out? It was completely non-intentional. I had no intention of pulling the wool over anybody, and I just said, build my deck, and I would have had him do some things differently after the fact, but, yeah, I wasn't aware. I didn't know that this modification, in my head, just building it out sideways, we used some of the existing structure. Now, if you saw some of my deck, I wish we didn't use existing structure because some of the posts heaved and you can see it's got a little crown in it. But anyway, that's the basic story behind that, is that I just went this way and I didn't realize
Okay,
what we needed to do.
all right. Marv, you had something to
Mr.
add to that?
Chair, I thought I read someplace that existing one only went 8 feet out. Is it 10 feet? Is that,
There was a discrepancy between what the assessor had in their records when they measured the deck versus what was in the application. And so the assessor's measurement was that it was 8 feet deep, and the applicant's claim is that the deck has always been 10 feet deep. So I did ask the applicant to reconcile that, and so in these here, so I'll let him speak for
Right,
himself.
well, and I guess my intent there, again, wasn't to go any further than the existing deck, and the existing deck was 10 foot. The only thing I can have to support that right now is a drawing of the original cabin that showed it was actually a 10 by 15 foot deck on it, and that's all I have.
Could you bring up that comparison pictures again? I don't know if
Yep,
we
you
can
bet.
see from that, but it's what we've got, I guess.
Yep, and the other thing I can pull up if you want is the assessor's drawing with the measurements. Do you want that?
That
It'll
would
take
be
me just a
wonderful.
second to
Any
do that, yeah. So
evidence
give me
is-
just a moment.
Okay, while she's pulling that, Mr. Chair, one of the things we have to look at here is when, this is after the fact, but maybe you can allude to us, we have to come up with a practical difficulty for adding onto that deck. Just like if you come in for the first time to get a variance for it, because you're asking for after the fact, but we have to kind of look at it as if we would have granted that if you'd have come ahead of time. So what would you think would be a practical
Well, other than
difficulty?
other than the fact that it was old and railing height wasn't correct and the deck was splintering, I think that was, excuse me, the primary reason for replacing the deck, whether it would have been that same size or extended east and west. That would be it, I guess. I don't know what else to say about that.
I'm going to check one thing. There, okay. So this is their drawing, so this is the house and all sketch. So we're looking at that 8 feet deep. And they're showing 32 feet wide.
And that was what?
So that's what the assessor has always had.
And what year was that in?
Well, they're putting a date of 1981 on that, so they're looking at that arrived on the house the same date or year of when that house was built. We don't have permitting records of the home, so I don't have any permitting records as far as what was originally permitted as far as for house and deck.
Amy,
This is a nightmare.
that really doesn't match up to the photograph from 2017, though, does it?
No, it does not. So that's why we're working off of, and I'll go back to that. That's why we're working off of, since we don't have permitting, sorry, let me get over.
So would it be better if it was, no, 32 feet long?
Yeah. So normal process would be when we get a request to replace a deck, we go out there, we measure up, and we photograph what's there, and that's what they're entitled to. Since we don't have that, but we can see from aerial photograph that there's a change, now we're relying on all sorts of other records to try to figure out what was there. So that's the hard part about after the fact things and verifying what someone had a right to prior. So let me get back to, give me just a second here to get.
Chair,
Go ahead, Brent.
I'd just like to ask Ken a question. Maybe I missed it, but what year did you purchase this property?
2004,
2004.
correct.
And in the photo that Amy has up right now, is that the deck that was there in 2004 when you purchased
Yeah,
it?
it was 10 by, like I said, 10 by 14 or 10 by 16, whatever I said in there. And it wasn't the full length, but it was, that gray, smaller deck, yes.
I see. And so it didn't go all the way to the end of the home like that assessor's note showed?
It did not.
Okay.
No, it is more, it was on this drawing.
It appears it was kind of centered on the house and just wide enough to allow entrance and exit on that first sliding glass door. Is
Right.
that about right?
Yes.
That's what it appears, at least in the photo.
Did you have a side-by-side picture?
Yes, I do. Let me zoom out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm inclined to go with your deduction of 8 by 16 being as best you can come up with. And that's according to all the evidence you've got.
Right, and that's why we wanted to make sure we were framing the variance request correctly as far as to reflect the dimensions that he had out there and what the difference was, because that's always something that you ask.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Did that answer? Okay, go ahead, Brent.
Well, I just wanted to ask Amy a question here too. So I'm struggling with this assessor's drawing of that. Given that when Ken bought the property, it wasn't the 8 by 32, it was the arguably 10 by 16 or whatever it was. He would be able to maintain that which was in existence when he purchased it, not what a historical record was because it was removed?
So one of the things that I'm looking at is, so these field cards that you see, what I have access to tonight goes back to 2013. So, and they do their quintile. Let me just take a peek here. they do their quintile every 5 years. And so generally, if they don't pick up any sort of permit or anything that would change, then they're generally not, like in their quintile, they're verifying that that deck is there, but they're not necessarily measuring it up if they're not running off a permit that clues them into something changed, or if it's obvious that something changed. From a permitting standpoint, we would be looking at what they had at the time they were replacing, and that's what they would have a right to. So for example, if historically this was an 8x32, and at some point they replaced it with something smaller, moving forward, that's what we would be permitting to replace.
Right, and I understand that, so that's why I'm trying to clarify that.
Yes.
This showed a much larger deck
Correct.
on the assessors, but when he purchased the property, that had already been removed.
So it
Somebody put
appears-
something smaller in,
It
so
appears
the
that
right to rebuild that same large size is not permitted.
that's correct.
Okay.
Okay, are we all agreeing 8x16 was what was removed and replaced with the current deck?
I think we can agree to that.
Okay. All right, public input then. We're ready for that? Okay, is there any public input at this time? Any public input at this time? Any public input? As there is none, we'll close the meeting to public input and proceed with the questions or more
Mr.
questions.
Chair, which one are you going to do first?
Okay, good point. Do we want to do them separately? Can we do them together and give adequate reasons for each one as we're addressing each question? What would be more clear to you guys? Doing them separately?
Separately, in my opinion.
Brent?
I would think separately as well.
Okay,
I prefer separately.
okay, let's do it that way then. Well, since the deck is old news, should we do that first?
Yes.
Okay.
One moment, just to make sure I have what I need here.
Want to borrow my papers?
If you don't have, we'll blame Sharon.
I need. I do not need that. I need to make a copy. Give me one moment.
Okay. Oh, yeah, she would need two original, wouldn't she? Oh. She can't go with little notes off to the side like we might. Yeah.
And I only give her one, because I don't know that you're gonna do them separate.
It's not your fault.
I wanted to get out of here.
It's Mara's fault.
I wanted to get out here sooner, but I think we had legitimately to do it correctly.
Yeah, this will be much clearer.
I told my wife I was gonna be home at 9 o'clock. I think I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I should have had supper before I came. Didn't realize it.
Yeah, same here.
First one took a long time.
Okay, I'm ready now. Which one are you gonna do first?
Okay, we're ready?
Yes, but I need to know which one you're doing first.
Okay, we're doing the deck.
Okay.
And we're looking at it as a variance request to build a, what is it currently now?
It's a 30 by 10.
30 by 10. Okay,
I think I have to make one more copy. Or not, let's see here. Give me just a second. I just need to make sure I have everything ready. All right, so I'm gonna need this and this.
just for the applicant's information, if we were to approve this as a variance, then we would address the after-the-fact questions. If we don't approve it, we don't go to the after-the-fact questions.
Okay, I have everything I need. All right.
I'm good.
Okay, so we're looking at this as an 8-foot by 16-foot deck, wanting to be replaced by a 30 by 10. Okay, and that is the variance request in front of us. Okay, we're starting with question number 1. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? I'm starting out with Marvin.
I don't believe it is, and my main reason, it already was infringing in a shore impact zone, and it's infringing more so in a shore impact zone. So when you're within that 50 feet of the lake, it's really hard to go ahead and allow this.
Okay, anyone else? Go ahead, Dave.
And Mr. Chairman, I would agree with what Marv said.
Okay, anybody else want to add? I'll just add that the garage and house met the intent and purpose at the time of construction by meeting the 50-foot setbacks. There's a bunch of other things on the property that don't. And the deck didn't even meet the intent and purpose of the ordinance back when the house was constructed, because it was within that 50 feet. The house was 53, the deck is what, 40?
Or it is 44 and a half.
45, 44, yeah. And at 8 feet, it was 46, so still within the 50-foot. So the intent and purpose was not met even at the time of construction without a permit. And today, of course, the setback is 75 feet with consideration on a 50-foot shore impact zone. All right, that's all I'd like to add to that on the deck. Any other thoughts on it? Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Starting out with you, Brent.
And we're just addressing the deck here, so I would say he would be proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner that is not permitted by the land use ordinance. I would agree.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Marv.
Mr. Chair, the way I look at it is it reasonable to have a deck out front and be able to enjoy the lake? Absolutely, it's very reasonable. Is it reasonable adding onto this deck and infringing into the shore impact zone? No, I don't believe it is. That's my view of that.
I'd agree with Marv on that. That's, a deck is reasonable, but not within the shore impact zone. Anybody else want to add on to that, number 2? Number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Sorry to say this, but yes, it will, because the essential character of the neighborhood is, or of the locality is nonconformity. So, but I say that tongue in cheek. So, no, the character of the neighborhood should reflect the intent and purpose of the ordinance, which is, at the very least, as Marv had stated earlier, outside of that shore impact zone, at the very least, and should be approaching the 75-foot. That should be the essential character of the locality. And one property at a time, that's all we can do. If you were to look at the ordinance that you're asking for, infringing on the setbacks for, or infringing upon its 30, could you go to that ordinance 301, Amy? Maybe not a bad time, but we'll probably want to look at it later anyway. But the ordinances that are being asked for variances from tonight. Okay, is the purpose of this section 301, the final statement. Further, it is the intent of the ordinance that all non-conforming lots, uses, and structures eventually be brought into conformity. 301.6 nonconformity, including the lawful use and occupation at the time, including, may be continued, including through repair, replacement, restoration, maintenance, improvement, but not expansion. So, and then the other ordinances are the setbacks from the lake that you're asking for relief from.
So, can I
That's
say
okay.
something?
Not at this point.
Oh, okay.
Okay, anybody else want to add into that? Okay, we're on question number 4. Is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Start out, or, yeah, Clint, we'll start out with you.
I'd say no. You know, like you stated, like Chairman Stish stated earlier, that, you know, this house was there back in the old set of rules. The house kind of met the 50-foot setback. The deck has always been out of compliance, but he had the right to continue on with that structure. I just don't see a practical difficulty to warrant adding on to that deck.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, the original deck that you replaced this one with was the legal nonconformity. Now it's just nonconforming and not legal. It doesn't have a permit. Okay, any additions to number 4? Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Dave Brucher, we'll start with you.
I'd say no. That basically just kind of going over the same responses you had to some of the previous questions there kind of apply here as well. That, you know, that building that deck was not created by actions other than the landowner or the previous landowners.
Okay, anybody else want to add to that?
Mr. Chair, I'd just add, I think Ken told us that he relied on a contractor, so it would be somebody other than the landowner, the previous landowners. However, the landowner would be responsible for the contractor he hires. But I just wanted to make that note that he did indicate it was the contractor. I don't know who that was, though.
Okay, good point, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Marv.
as Brent made this, we've had numerous individuals that contractors told them they can go ahead and they'll do it fine. And you're not the first, and it is the owner's responsibility. It sucks, but that is the way it is.
Okay. Are we ready for number 6? Okay, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Starting out with you, Marv.
I think it is. I think he wanted the deck to make it more user-friendly, put a railing on there and be able to do more family things. And I think, you know, he looked at it that way and he thought the place looked nicer with it. And so, I mean, I think all in all, he's thinking more than just in economic considerations. So I believe this is a yes.
Okay, anybody else like to add to that?
I'll just add to it, it probably would have been cheaper just to build the smaller deck. So it's not just economics, it is other than that.
All right, do you have enough there for that one, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. All right, are we ready to vote on the questions?
Yes.
Okay. Number 1, is the request in harmony with the general purposes intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
And Dave?
No.
Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Brent?
I'm going to say yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
I'm gonna say yes.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Myself was no, yeah. So, all right, number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Myself, the answer is no. Clint?
No.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
And Brent?
I'm going to say yes.
Number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Clint?
No.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
I'm going to say yes.
And myself is no.
Clint?
Clint?
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay. Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
And Dave?
Yes.
Okay, did you get all those votes okay, Amy? I did. All right. Only one question has been answered to the affirmative, and that's number 6. Is there a motion to deny this variance request?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to deny this request.
I second that motion.
Okay, motion is made and seconded to deny. Is there any discussion? If there's no further discussion, I'll proceed with a roll call vote. In favor, say aye. Opposed, say nay. Marv?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself is aye. Clint?
Aye.
And Dave?
Aye.
Okay. Your variance request for the extension of the deck has been denied. You'll have to meet with Amy or somebody from Land Services to determine what you can replace it with.
So you, speak or not, or,
Go ahead.
so is what I'm hearing is I have to turn my deck off the cabin?
Correct.
So, there's a section in the ordinance about, and Amy, I brought this to your attention, 706, about decks and construction of decks. And you said that's just for new decks. I don't know that it specifically says that's for new decks. Why wouldn't it be for modification? It has some relief from getting a variance?
So the way that ordinance section has always been administered, and that's my job, is to do that and interpret and apply that. And that comes from state shoreland rule as well. So the understanding and interpretation, how we've applied that to every other property owner has been, if your cabin meets that criteria of when it was built and all of that and hadn't been added on to or modified, and you don't have a deck, you can have one deck and we calculate how large it can be based on the setback from the water. If there's already a deck there, then you're falling under the nonconformity rules. So regardless of how big your deck was, if it was always there, we're not applying that formula to that. We're just allowing you to replace what you've always had. So they're kind of two different animals, and so that section doesn't apply to this scenario because there was already a deck and you would have been working under your replacement right with that deck.
And the rule about if you had no deck, that was only if you met the 75-foot setback?
No, if you are within the setback, then we calculate the difference between, it's a calculation, and that gives you how deep of a deck you can have. Correct.
Right, thank you.
And he can keep what he had for size before, so
That's
if he trimmed it down to
Correct.
the
He
original
has the
size.
right, yeah, he has the right to have what he always did.
Yes.
Yes.
Clear as mud, Mr. Brown?
Well, I'm shocked, quite frankly, that, that we are where we are and the potential of having to remove what might be there based on if I had had the information of an 8x32 deck that would have been on the record.
That's not what you would have had a right to, though. It would have been whatever you had at the time you replaced the deck, which is what we have according to the aerial photos.
So coming clean with you folks and everything like that is now I get penalized by this group because of trying to make it right on the thing because of the 50-foot setback and where my cabin was originally constructed. I'm just having a hard time processing that whole.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
So what we did tonight is just like you never added on to that deck. It's just like if you would have come to us, 2 years ago or whenever that deck got built, and you would have asked us, because if you would have come in and got a permit for it, you would have known that, nope, this is all the bigger you can get. So you'd be asking us if you wanted to build it the size that it is now, you'd have to come and have a variance like this. So we voted on and went through this process to deny it, just like we would have 2 years ago if you'd have come and asked for it. If we would have said yes, we have a whole nother set of questions that we'd have to go through to
Because
still.
it's after the fact.
Yes, because it's after the fact. So what we did tonight here, it's just like you were coming to us if you would have came 2 years ago or whenever the deck was built. And maybe that's why you're confused a little bit. I know it's not we've had people tear a lot more than a little bit of a deck off. And when we get into the shore impact zone, that's all regulated by DNR. So even if we wanted to change some of the statutes and the sections of the ordinance, a lot of that's regulated out of our powers. So one thing with the shore impact zone that we're really critical on that area. And it's a little different because your house is at that time when it was built, it was right on the edge of the shore impact zone, not the setback to the lake 75. So you're a little bit unique that way, so I don't know if that clears up anything.
Well, we better get on with the second request, which is not an after the fact, and it is a new request and will be filtered through the same set of criteria questions with the same rationale. We've been pretty thorough on the examination of that request, and there's a record on that. We need to answer the questions now. So we'll start, I think we'll start with the same routine. If it's okay with you, Marv, we start out with you first on this question, and that's the addition of, what is it, the addition of, Amy? Could you help me with that again?
An 8x26 addition onto the west side of the cabin. And that would be 50, let me grab my paper, and it would be located, where did that sheet go? Oh, 53.5 feet from the ordinary high water mark.
Okay, so within the setback, but outside of the shore impact zone.
Correct.
Okay. And the candidate has clarified the retaining wall and the steps. That would also be part of his request. All right, number one, is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Marv?
At first, I would answer this as no, but if we put a condition that we had a shoreline specialist come out there and possibly approve a barrier type deal that would prevent that creating issues with that water to it. Otherwise, I don't believe it is in harmony.
Okay, anybody else want to add to that? Go ahead, Dave.
You know, I say it, but I don't think so either. I think that, that whole cabin is within, non-compliant as is. And I looked at that ditch that runs through there, and, I looked at the way that the water, I think from what I've learned here, we're supposed to protect the quality of the water, isn't that right? And we've got the guttering off of that one side of the house towards the lake is guttered off, but then it just drains right into that ditch and right into the lake. And so there really isn't anything there we're increasing the impervious surface of the area there. I just don't see how we can say yes to a question where it's in harmony, because it is what it is there. So I'd have to agree with Marv even without conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to add to that?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
If we look at that back when this house was built, it was in compliance. Okay, the ordinance changed so that it's not in compliance. So I'm back and forth on that. He's talking about a 200 and some square foot addition. If it was on the south side, the lake side, absolutely not. I would prefer it on the north side, but he's talking about 8 feet out. He's not going to encroach anymore on the lake side. I don't know. It's going to add some impervious surface, but 200 square feet ain't a lot. But yes, I agree with what Marv said, that maybe you have to look at where that water would go. So I'm kind of back and forth, but I am going to answer yes, it's in harmony, because I got to take into consideration that from the house was legal back in the day it was built. And if it was towards the lakeside, I'd absolutely be against it. But that's just my thoughts.
Okay. Anybody else? I'd like to add that, whenever we put on a condition that is kind of contingent upon what we think the shoreline specialist might find, we really don't know. I mean, we don't know if he can find any runoff or retaining wall or anything that'll stabilize that area and prevent erosion into that waterway. We don't know that, so any condition that we'd place based on those sets of maybes that might help you vote in favor of it, I think you have to discount that real heavily, because we don't know what he could come up with, if anything. Again, I have to agree, the house it met the intent and purpose of the ordinance at the time of the construction, the house and the garage. There's been a lot of additions onto there that are grandfathered in that shouldn't be there at all, even with the ordinance at the time of the house and construction. They were just done without permits. They weren't caught. There's clearly overuse of the property outside of the ordinance, which negatively impacts the shoreline, negatively impacts the viewing, how the public perceives properties. All they see along that stretch of shoreline is nonconformities, and it's not the intent and purpose of the ordinance, which is to preserve natural resources, which includes how things look. What kind of a view do you want on the lake? More nonconformity? I don't think so. Anybody else on number one?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
not for number one, but Amy, can you pull up the building envelope? Might help me with the future question here.
Go ahead, Dave. Go to number 2.
Oh. Does this pertain to number one or number two, Brent?
Number 2.
Okay. Have I stated that question yet?
No.
I didn't think so. Okay, as a request, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? We're starting out with you, Brent. Go ahead. You got ahead of me there a little bit, confused me. Doesn't take much, especially at 9:45.
I think he's proposing, if I understand this right, to put on this 8 by 16 to put a bathroom in and then decommission a bathroom, or leave the second bathroom?
So actually put in 2 bathrooms, decommission 1 bathroom.
So this addition is to put the 2 bathrooms in 8 by 16?
8 by 26.
8 by 26, I'm sorry. And then decommission the other one.
That's correct.
I'm gonna, I think it is reasonable to have a bathroom. I don't know that it's reasonable to have 2 in this area that's outside of the building envelope.
Okay. Is that your final answer on that one?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else like to add to that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I think it's reasonable to ask for the couple hundred square feet that he's asking for without infringing more on the impact zone. I guess what the building's gonna be, it could be bathrooms or bedrooms or whatever it's gonna be, it's still gonna be the same square footage. One thing maybe I would ask the applicant, is there an absolute need to have a stairway out that way?
Absolute need? Probably not.
Because the reason I asked that was, I feel confident in building an 8-foot structure out with, the footing of that building being a so-called retaining wall. And if they're careful in their construction, it wouldn't disturb much of the downhill slope, because that's pretty flat there. It starts going downhill somewhere between the stakes and the stakes of the, where he's proposing his little walkout. So I'm not looking too much as far, and we'll talk about the water and the runoff. It's still, I don't think it's gonna add a lot. I mean, there's a lot of water that goes to that lake, but I think what we gotta worry about is polluted water that goes to that lake. So if we'd have erosion or something like that. As far as the roof line going, he's got an artesian well. That's running to the lake, it's water. And that's probably recirculating back from the lake. So I think when we're look at some runoff, we wanna worry about the erosion part of it and contaminating, just water. I don't think really affects the water quality. It's when it's erodible water. I think that's my take on it.
Can I say anything at this point?
Very short.
If it goes into what I was alluding to.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that drainage way as it is. If I have no easement on my title that says there can be a drainage easement in there, why do I need it?
Good question. Can't be answered here tonight, other than it looks like a natural waterway to me that's just been kept up over all the years. I don't
Well, if you
know.
look down,
The culvert into the lake, that's an interesting thing.
there's a culvert my neighbor put in
Oh,
15
Mr.
years
Chair.
ago.
okay.
I think that's beyond the scope of what we can do. It's beyond, I think that would have to be something that would have to be researched back in all of the records as far as how it was established, why it was established. The township probably would have some insight into that. It does look like it's providing some equalization between that wetland complex, and it's probably for protection of the road, so that wetland doesn't overtop that road on high times. So it's a lot, I think it's a lot more than just so it's the hydrology of that whole area that it's serving. And this board isn't gonna insert themselves into why or how or what you should be doing with it.
But you're making some comment on potential of me disturbing that or making it worse.
Because it outlets to the lake. And so it's water that is being mainstreamed straight to the lake,
I
so.
clean that thing all the time. I mean, anyway, so, okay. I mean, because it's, look good.
Okay, thanks for your input on that, your question. Anybody else on number 2? Well, I think reasonable. Is it reasonable to add on to a nonconformity when our ordinance clearly states that we should not? I agree, it's in the shore impacts, it's outside of the shore impact zone, that's good. I agree with Clint's observations on the door. Definitely, that door is going to have a negative impact on that slope there down into that waterway. There's going to need to be a landing there. If there isn't, it'll be a path that's worn in. And then there's this other retaining wall that he's mentioning the need of, and that also is going to destabilize that bank. So I agree with your comments on, the addition itself, that wall being the only retaining wall, and nothing further to that waterway. That would be a good suggestion if anybody were to say yes to this. Are we ready for number 3?
Yep.
Will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the neighborhood? I'll start out with that, and same thing I said before. Sorry to say so, yes. Now, it continues a nonconformity, increases the nonconformity. That seems to be the essential character. And it shouldn't be. So my answer would be no on that one. Anybody else like to add to that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I'll point out, you got a neat, quaint little cabin there. I think a lot of people would be very envious what you have. Adding on 200 square feet isn't asking for a tremendous amount. It's just the concern of where it's at and the creek that could create it. But is it going to change anything of the locality or essential character of locality? I don't think it will.
Okay. Anybody else like to add?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I think the immediate locality, it kind of fits in there all the same, about the same distance from the lake, about the same size cabins. But then if you really want to look at something, go down the road a half a mile and see what's built down there. You'd think this is pretty nice. So just want to throw that in there.
Okay.
I don't know if you drove down on the end,
No,
but
I did not.
yeah, your hair would have come out of your head, Dave.
Did we mention our viewings on this when we started out?
I don't think we did.
Oh, for the record, I viewed it on the 24th. Marv and Clint and Amy viewed it on the 22nd.
And Brent also.
And Brent also on the 22nd. And Dave was yesterday, the 25th.
Yesterday morning.
Yep, okay, just for the record. So we're ready for number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property. Starting out with Clint on that one.
I think the uniqueness is, what I think's really part of this is, it's nonconformity. We can argue that there was something there back in the day when it was built and it was in compliance then. And I think part of it is we're looking at that little waterway that goes through there, and I think that's what's not easy on everybody's mind. So, maybe that's a practical difficulty because of that. I'm not quite sure, but if I was going to say there's a practical difficulty, that's what I'd probably say.
I guess I'd respond to that observation with one of my own, which would be, if you do add on, you're creating a difficulty, not, it doesn't make for a practical difficulty, you'd be creating one. So it's not unique to have a non-conforming property. It's not unique to be within the setback to the lake. That's how all these properties are. Okay, anybody else want to add to number 4? Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Start off with Dave on this one.
No, I don't think so. I think that, he explained why he wanted to put it on that side, but that it just, it's not a need, it's a desire, I believe. If I'm answering the question correctly? No. It's not landowner or private, or created by actions other than the landowner or the private landowner.
Yep. And I would add by a perceived practical or personal need rather than a practical difficulty. I would say that probably remodeling inside in the cabin could do the same thing. Have to be a little more creative. Okay, anybody else on number 5? Okay, number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than economic considerations? We're starting out with you, Marv.
Actually, I think a good share of this was economic. He was thinking about it. He said adding on with the plumbing would be the easiest, cheapest, most reasonable, even though he could put on the roadside. I'm just hearing majority of this is economic considerations. And that's just my take of it.
Mr. Chair, I tend to believe I agree with Marv. I think, he pointed it out that it was economic.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Clint.
Yeah, we all know that part of it is economics. I don't believe it's all economics. It just, to me, it just fits in nice to put it where he wants to. It just makes sense, other than some of the surroundings around it. I think it's a lot about economics, but I'm not gonna say it's the only thing.
Well, obviously, another thing is the personal needs, personal wishes, personal desires, and we can't use that as a reason. It's got to be something more than just economics. Any addition to that? Ready to the vote? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
I'm gonna say yes.
And Dave?
No.
Okay, number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
I'm gonna say yes.
And Dave?
No.
And Marv?
No.
Number 3 is the issuance of the variance. Will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Myself, the answer is no. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
Yes.
And Brent?
Yes.
Okay, number 4 is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property. Clint?
I'm gonna say yes.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Number 5 is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners. Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? We're starting with Marv.
No.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
And Dave?
No.
Okay, the questions have all been answered to the negative. All questions had a majority of no votes.
I'm showing,
Or
showing
was there one?
question,
Oh,
yeah, question.
Question 3 was yes.
Was yes.
correct, I'm sorry, there were 2 noes and 3 yeses. Question number 3 was the only question answered to the affirmative. Thank you. So is there a motion to deny this variance request?
I move that we deny this request.
I'll second that. Any discussion? No discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Starting with Marv.
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself's aye. Clint?
Aye.
And Dave?
Aye.
Okay, variance request denied.
Is there an appeal process or anything I can do with that?
You should talk to Amy about that. Yes, there is.
And I'm shocked, but
You got my other pen.
is the main concern the waterway, or are we done? I guess.
We're done. Yep, you can discuss with staff what your options might be.
So do I call you, Amy, or?
Yep, you can call or email, whichever works for you.
Okay. What's the quickest way out to that back?
Are you parked in the parking lot?
Yes.
Okay, so you're gonna go
Up
out
through
this
here.
door, up the stairs, and then hang a right.
All right.
Yep, thank you for your patience throughout the evening and for the information you provided us. Appreciate it.
You have a good evening, too.
Did you sign those?
Oh, yes. Oh, no. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion to accept as presented?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to accept the previous meeting's minutes.
Okay, I'd second that.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion was made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, minutes approved or accepted. New business, old business?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, can I make a motion to adjourn?
please.
I'll second.
Okay, motion made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries, adjourned at 10:03.